Hi witches! Thank you so much for joining me today to chat all about Samhain! Yay! Oh my gosh, I am so excited and I hope yesterday's new moon and solar eclipse energies were productive for you. Many, many blessings to you all and thank you again for joining me today. Now today we're going to be chatting all about this upcoming holiday on the wheel of the year, Samhain. Now if you're one of my friends joining me from the southern hemisphere, be sure to check out my videos on Beltane, which is the holiday that you will likely be celebrating to honor that midpoint between spring and summer. Hopefully the weather is warming up for you. Now, contrary to popular belief, Samhain was not the name of some ancient Celtic god of death, and I do blame Hollywood for perpetuating that myth. Now let's practice together saying the name of this holiday. It is Samhain. Samhain, not Samhain, like, again, Hollywood likes to say, but Samhain. And again, it comes from Irish. It's an Irish word, meaning summer's end. Possibly there is a little bit of debate as to what the word actually meant back in those days. However, Irish is still a living language, so it's really good to try your best to pronounce things as accurately as possible. And again, thank you so much to all of my Irish viewers who helped me with practicing those pronunciations. It has been such a gift to be able to learn how to say things properly, and it has deepened my practice with, again, the Morrigan, who is this Irish Celtic goddess, so thank you guys so much. Now, usually Samhain is celebrated around sundown on October 31st up until sundown on November 1st. Some people may just practice on the 31st. It is completely up to the witch. It's truly, like many of the other holidays, all about the season surrounding Samhain. So, for example, my coven and I already celebrated a week ago because we knew we were going to be busy actually on the 31st, since it's a Monday. Now, on Samhain, many practitioners believe that the veil is at its thinnest, and if you guys have questions about that, I made a video about it a little bit earlier this month, so definitely check it out. It's called, the veil is thin, so what? And this really means, as you might see from that video, that spirit communication and communication with the other side is going to be a lot easier on this day versus the rest of the year. Again, we see this is very similar to Beltane, which is when we see the veil between our world and the realm of the Fae here in the northern hemisphere to be thin as well. So if you're in the southern hemisphere, if there's any mischief going on, it might be the Fae. Now, for us here celebrating Samhain, it is definitely a fantastic time to engage with some ancestor work, do some divination, and really just hold space for any emotions that you might have surrounding the passage of loved ones, and in general, looking back at the year that we just lived through. Now with this, Samhain is also considered the witch's new year. Now, if we consider a calendar that is centered around the harvest season, perhaps like ancient peoples might have been, Samhain is kind of seen as the third and final harvest. We're harvesting the last of the apples, the pumpkins, the gourds, squash, corn, things that really endure or take a long time to grow in the fields, right? All that is generally kind of behind us. We've done all the harvesting. Hopefully you guys were able to visit a pumpkin patch or go apple picking this year. So by the time we get to October 31st in the year, all of that harvesting, all of that hard work is generally behind us, and it is time for us to rest during the winter in order to be more productive and to bloom forth more brilliantly or strongly in the spring. So if you're looking to do some divination, set some intentions for the winter or the year ahead, I really encourage you to do so during this holiday. Now again, for some witches and pagans, Samhain is really the time of year where we focus a lot on ancestor work. We're honoring those people who came before us. And you may find that they come forward to offer advice or guidance for the year ahead, and I encourage you guys to listen to that if that does occur. Overall, Samhain is one of my favorite holidays on the wheel of the year. I know that sounds a little bit strange, but I do work with a death deity, and that is one of the very prominent, I guess, symbols of this holiday. We are celebrating and honoring the end of this fertile part of the year, kind of like the dying of the earth. We're holding space for that, allowing ourselves to mourn in order to move forward. So I really just love this holiday. I love new beginnings, so I'm super excited to celebrate Samhain. Now I do want to point out that this does differ from Halloween. I do, as a pagan, see these as two very different holidays. For me, Halloween is more of the secular, I guess, kind of candy and Frankenstein and jack-o'-lanterns, even though that does kind of overlap, which we're going to talk about. But for me, Samhain is more of like the spiritual aspect or the spiritual holiday of Halloween. I love Halloween for what it is. Love costumes, love going to Halloween parties, love everything spooky, but I do see Samhain as something very different and sacred in its own right, if that makes sense. So if you feel that way too, know that you're not alone. I do see a lot of practitioners breaking these two things up, but a lot of symbols from Halloween you'll see derive from this holiday Samhain, these symbols that are important to Samhain. So see how many you can point out. Let's first dive into some of the spiritual intentions associated with this holiday. And these include, of course, transformation, death and rebirth, looking ahead to the new year, working on shadow work, rest, new beginnings, like I said, mourning, grief. It is also very common to do protection magic during Samhain, so protection from harm is a very big theme to this holiday, as well as ancestor work, death work, shadow work, and then honoring that final harvest of the year. Now, as with any holiday on the wheel of the year, pagans love to throw feasts, but instead of having maybe as decadent of a feast as you had for Mabon, you might find that your meals for Samhain are a little bit more meager or a little bit more modest. You should focus on incorporating foods such as apples, pumpkins or pumpkin breads, squash, gourds, corn, mulled wine, or mead. You could also make soul cakes, which is a common thing to do around this year. I don't particularly like them, so I tend not to. It also has some ties to like Christianity and All Hallows Eve, which again, I don't really jive with, but if that is part of your practice, go for it. I hope you have an awesome recipe. If you're not all about those adult premium beverages, don't worry. You can totally indulge in some sparkling cider or just apple cider, whatever you guys want, as well as nuts, seeds, stuff like that for sowing our intentions for the new year are going to be prevalent. But again, I feel like it's less of this decadent feast because we don't have as much food or abundance available to us. It's the third harvest. So while we did a lot more of that gathering and that harvesting work during Mabon, I really encourage you guys to think a little bit maybe more modestly and really use the vegetables and the fruits and things that you have on hand for your environment to create something really special. Now, if you are not a kitchen witch, you're like, oh my gosh, I hate baking and cooking, no worries. Some things that you can do to celebrate in terms of decorating your home, or maybe to even wear on you if you are a practitioner who can't openly practice. I would suggest focusing on colors such as black, purples, grays, oranges, dark reds, golds, those colors that you really think of when you think of Halloween, honestly, so black and orange is a big one. So those colors, along with any colors that you would naturally find in nature around you right now. Speaking of nature, if you are a green witch who wanted to infuse some herbal magic into your Samhain practices, I recommend using herbs such as mugwort and mullein, some of my favorites, clove, either whole clove or like ground clove, allspice, rosemary, garlic. If you are an advanced practitioner, maybe experimenting with some more toxic or perhaps psychoactive herbs, as long as you are being careful, please be careful. If that seems a little bit too much, maybe using herbs such as marigold, cinnamon, pumpkin, acorns, stuff like that, things that are really associated with this season or with the themes that are associated with Samhain, such as death, rebirth, planning ahead, etc. So go wild, see what you have in your pantries. Oh, I'm gonna knock stuff over, oh my goodness. Now, I know that not all green witches are super into herbs. Some witches prefer crystals, and I really recommend using crystals such as onyx, obsidian, smoky quartz, amethyst, carnelian, silver, and moonstone to decorate your altar. So if you have those on hand, awesome. Onyx, obsidian, smoky quartz, those are all pretty easily accessible, especially at a metaphysical store. So I encourage you to go out this weekend and patronize, not like in the bad way, not like patronize, but be a patron to your local witchcraft store. Now, in terms of other symbols that you might see associated with this holiday, the number one thing is, of course, the pumpkin or the jack-o'-lantern. Now, pumpkins are associated with abundance. Think about all of those seeds that they have inside, all of that potential that they have inside. I always like to roast pumpkin seeds that come out of my personal jack-o'-lantern, but some witches and pagans do tend to carve protective symbols or sigils into pumpkins. And of course, there is a more historic usage of pumpkins or more specifically turnips, to be honest with you. But in ancient Celtic practice around this time of year, people would carve really scary looking faces into these turnips or other root vegetables and put them outside their homes in order to scare away any spirit who may be wandering the woods on Halloween night or Samhain night. And this turned into the pumpkin once people began to like colonize the Americas and discovered the pumpkin. So the history of the jack-o'-lantern is actually very fascinating. You might also see symbols of death, such as skulls, tombstones. The scythe is also a really big one, which is a symbol of harvest, actually. You may also see symbols such as black cats, besoms. The witch is a very big symbol associated with Samhain, so be your witchy self indeed. You might also see reference to a type of deity classified as a psychopomp, which means that they ferry people's souls from this world to the next. Now, I know that might seem like a complex word or a complex topic, but I work with two psychopomps. I work with Hecate, who is known to go from this world to the underworld pretty frequently, and Anpu or Anubis, and quite frankly, they are very welcoming and nice, but you might also consider your ancestors, especially if you have a specific ancestor in your family that is known to kind of come forward. Like, I have heard stories of like, oh, grandma visited this person before they died and she told them that it was going to be okay and led them into the afterlife. I've heard stories like that. If you have something like that, you know, in your family, maybe consider giving them a little bit of an extra, just like nod or honor them this year. Other deities considered psychopomps, of course, include Hermes, the Grim Reaper. Some people considered sparrows those who ferry souls, so you might see that bird as a symbol associated with Samhain, as well as other animals such as snakes, ravens, and crows, wolves, bats, nocturnal creatures, etc. So now that we've talked about all of the symbols and the correspondences, let's talk about how you can celebrate Samhain this year. Now, the first thing that I absolutely recommend, simply because it's so incredibly accessible to a lot of witches, is kitchen magic around this time of year. So it's a really great time to consider how you can use herbs, maybe making some pumpkin bread with some extra cinnamon and cloves or something like that, right? But celebrating this end of the harvest season. I really think that it's good to put a point of punctuation on there just to be like, yes, we did it, we made it, and then we are looking ahead to the new year. So it's always good to celebrate this time of the year, this time of the season. I don't know, the zombies song. But I always think it's good to like pause. Sometimes having a nice meal or a special meal can help facilitate that pause. Next, I recommend honoring the ancestors, including leaving offerings, speaking to them, writing them letters, or hosting a silent supper in which you will leave places and actually serve them food. Then you'll leave it out and return the food to the earth at sunrise the next day. That is my personal way of doing a silent supper. So another term for a silent supper is a dumb supper, but that just feels really ableist and gross to me, so I've been calling it a silent supper, but that's literally what I'm talking about. If you see it referenced in another book, it's the same thing. I use a different word for it because the original term just seems a little bit strange to me. Next, moving right along, I encourage you to hold a seance or try to contact the other side. Now, if you are a novice practitioner and don't feel comfortable with that, you absolutely don't have to do this, but as a death witch, as a hedge witch, as a practitioner of 12 years, this is one of my practices for Samhain. It's really, really fun, especially with other people, with some of your friends. Even if you don't actually make contact with anything or anyone, it is still really fun to do, so I encourage you to do so. You may want to honor those you have lost in the past year, perhaps recounting your favorite story or memory that you have of that person. This is a really good time of year to donate to a food pantry. A lot of food pantries don't get tons of donations throughout the year. They tend to get them right at Christmas, but so if you can, maybe consider doing a devotional act of service this Samhain. This is also a really great time, speaking of like Yule and the holidays, it's a really good time to start preparing your house for winter. So finishing up any of those last projects before it gets too cold, and getting things ready for Yule. Then also along the same lines, preparing beginning any new winter projects, such as new grimoires or things that will serve as gifts for your loved ones plans as the holidays kind of come into swing. Then you can visit a cemetery, which again, I have a whole video about cemetery etiquette, so be sure to brush up on that before you go traipsing around a graveyard. I think I mentioned it before, but you can go ahead and carve protective runes on your jack-o'-lanterns to keep your home and hearth safe this Samhain. This is also a traditional time to start shadow work and do divination for the year ahead. And the final two suggestions that I have, I think, are some of the most important, but those are simply to connect with nature, even if it's just for a few minutes, and most importantly, to rest. I feel like we've all had kind of crazy years this year. I know I am no different, but I am so grateful that you guys are still here with me. Thank you guys so much for sticking it out. And I hope that this helped you prepare for Samhain. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.